Thank you very much for joining. My name is Dave Evers, and I'm the Manager of Business Development in the Executive and Professional Development team. Thank you for joining the webinar today. I'd first like to turn it over to the Director of Executive and Professional Development, Rachel Wright.
Thanks, Dave. Eina mana, eina rio, ro rangatira ma, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, katoa. On behalf of the University of Auckland Business School and Executive and Professional Development, along with PwC, I really warmly welcome you to today's webinar on the workforce skills crisis in New Zealand. At Executive and Professional Development, our mission is to help organisations succeed through transformative and thought-provoking courses and programs for individuals, teams and organisations. We want to enable individuals and organisations to have a real positive impact, be successful and help create a more prosperous Aotearoa for all. I'm pretty sure that today's topic of the workforce finding talent, everybody who manages a team is facing this. It's quite a nightmare if somebody comes to you and tells you that somebody is leaving because you know it's going to be really hard to find a replacement. And I think we've been so used to manipulating or not using pay as the way to attract the best talent, but that actually is no longer possible because people are looking for more than pay as part of their job. And also there's a limit to what organisations can actually pay because of all the economic and inflationary issues that are occurring globally and within New Zealand. You know, people are wanting to feel valued, they want to have a purpose in what they're doing in their jobs. So I think I'm really looking forward to hearing from experts today to understand what I can do as a manager to find the right talent and keep the great people I've already got. So I really hope today that you find the next hour really useful, and please do make use of the Q&A and ask any question that you may have related to the topic. Back to you, Dave.
Thank you very much, Rachel. So again, I mentioned I'm Dave Evers, and before we get into the presentation very quickly, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about executive and professional development at the University of Auckland. So basically, we provide non-degree executive capability development for organizations. We have short courses. We do custom programs for companies, and we also have two programs that are journey leadership programs that we are recruiting for right now. One is our transitioning to the C-suite program, and it's really my background is an executive MBA program. It's sort of like a mini senior leadership executive MBA. It'll start in September and run through December, and you can see we have 4 specializations. So if you're in mid-tier management, you're looking to move into senior management, this is a great program for you. 2 of our panelists today are actually on our advisory group for the transitioning to the C-suite. And we'll have an information session later on in the month. I'll send you information about. And our leadership mindset program, which is really a program, it's also a journey program, which is more specific to building up your emotional intelligence and leadership, a very unique program that's been running for a long time. And again, if you're interested in either of these programs, I'll send you an email about it and you can reach out and attend one of our upcoming information sessions. And here's myself, Dave Evers, in business development, and my colleague, Noah Gabriel also. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or want to do development for your team, for your individual, or for your organization. Okay, great. Let's move right into the webinar. We have a lot to cover. Really excited by the panel we have. And really what, our short, sharp webinars really represent very similar to our programs, where different than if you're doing a degree program, this is really where the research and the academic rigor of the university meets the real world of business and what takes place. And in our programs, we bring together a lot of executives from business, from public sector organizations, along with our University of Auckland academics. And the discussion that we're going to have during this webinar is going to be very similar to what might take place in a classroom. So with that, I'll introduce our panel, and then we'll move along. So very pleased to have Barbara Harrison, who is the Chief People Officer of GUD Holdings. She has over 20 years of experience leading people and culture in teams for private and public sector organizations across Australia and New Zealand. She's currently in Melbourne right now and has been on our C-suite advisory group for a long time. Susan Lowe is the Chief People Officer for Fuel 50, the world's fastest growing talent and opportunity marketplace, and really doing a global organization doing recruiting. And Danny Williams, who is Director of People and Organizational Management Consulting at PwC and leading workforce organizational HR transformation programs for her clients. She's been really busy over the past couple of years, working with clients on all the challenges that have been faced by them, especially through COVID. And we've had a couple great discussions with our panel over the last couple of weeks preparing for this. So really excited by the insights. As Rachel mentioned, we'll take questions from you in the Q&A function as we're going along. You can submit them, and if they're relevant, I'll bring them in as the discussion goes along, or we'll get to them at the end. So we'll have each panelist give a short presentation, followed by a panel discussion, and then Q&A. So with that, I'll turn it over to Danny.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can see me.
Yes.
Fab. Okay, I will just bring up my presentation. A moment, please. Where is my share screen? Sharing screen. So can you please let me know that you can see?
Absolutely.
This, okay.
Now we are seeing it, and now it's full screen. I think you're good.
Great. Okay, and I will just make sure that I can see what I need to see.
Yep.
Oops, there we go. So you can see that okay?
Yep, very good. Thank you.
Fabulous. Tēnā koutou katoa, everyone. Ko pronga te maunga, ko waipati awa, ko tangata tiriti ahau, no Aotearoa honga ahau, ko Danny Williams tuku ingoa, no reira, kia ora koutou katoa. Thanks for the brief introduction, Dave. So as Dave mentioned, I'm here to speak to you very briefly. I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour, really around the talent or skills crisis, because in many ways they're very similar at the moment in a New Zealand context. We're starting from a premise, I guess, that we all know that something is different, and it is hard to find what you're looking for in the market right now. And you know, everyone I speak to talks to me about feeling busy, feeling overwhelmed. And so there's a capacity and capability piece in here. The slides I'm going to cover off with you briefly today really just try to collect and summarize some of those key themes that we're seeing in our data, both here in New Zealand and Australia, but also internationally. And taking some of those pragmatic steps that you might be able to take within your workplaces, because the problem seems like a massive problem, and there are things within your circle of influence, and there are some things that just aren't. So that will be what I cover off today. So is there a workforce skills crisis, or are we being dramatic? Well, I think probably it's very much a crisis. You know, a crisis is when something requires action to shift it. And the current situation we're finding ourselves in, there are three kind of buckets. So the first being that the workforce is changing shape and makeup, and this has been a bit more of a slow burn. So this is the aging population, it's slowing population growth to replenish the workforce. And that's starting to come to a head. Now, in the perfect storm, we've also got the second one there, which is more of an accelerating flame around jobs changing. So often when we think about the future of work, we talk about technology replacing jobs, or jobs going away and new ones coming about. But actually, a lot of what we're seeing in reality is changing jobs. So whilst the jobs still look the same on the outside, for example, whether it's an HR advisor or HR manager or a production manager or whatever that might be, the nature of the skills required to do the job are the pieces that are changing most rapidly. And it's not always overly visible. So people are adapting as they go, but actually there's an intervention required there. And then thirdly, the dreaded COVID. So that has completely accelerated this tension around the workforce when it comes to the shifts required to be able to adapt the workforce for today. So some of the things that we are seeing, for example, most notably are immigration being starved, and that we're not getting the usual flow in and out. In fact, we're getting more people leaving New Zealand right now than coming in. We are seeing very low unemployment rates. We're seeing underutilization also quite low. And we're seeing lower than usual NEET rates and not in education, employment or training. So those are our, particularly our young people coming out of school and coming into the workforce. There's only 2 regions in New Zealand where that's actually increased, which is unusual. And I think we're all feeling that pinch around capacity. So there's a piece in there, which I'll touch on soon in the presentation, around the impact of COVID on capacity of the workforce. So thinking about taking out large chunks of the workforce due to illness, but also that unmeasurable, we know it's there, but we haven't quantified it yet, but things like long COVID and the additional activity of response on top of business as usual. So what are we going to do about it? I've captured kind of 5 key themes. And the first thing that's top of mind really is around closing the gap. So one of the things that we're seeing quite a bit out in the market, but also in our research, is that what managers think they know and what they actually know are 2 different things. And the gap between those appears to be wider than it might usually be. We can say it's because people are working from home or whatever, but actually it's a communication piece. We know, for example, and to your point, Rachel, earlier, pay is a hygiene factor typically when we think about motivator hygiene theory. But right now, remuneration is top of mind for employees. We know that as many as a third, I think it was about a third of employees are seeking for pay rises this year, and it typically is those in the more skilled professions that will be seeking pay rises. There's a number of drivers that are likely sitting behind this, and we have indication that it's a combination of people have been working hard for a couple of years and they really want a bit of pay to kind of compensate for the effort, the additional efforts. There's a piece about knowing that it's their market right now. So, you know, while it's right for the picking. Interestingly, wellbeing is number 2. A couple of years ago, CEOs were also talking about skills being number 1 on their radar, but this past year, our chief executive survey for PwC internationally was showing that health implications at a macro level are a significant influence on the things that are keeping them awake at night. And then thirdly, experience. So there are 3 things really top of mind for employees right now. That's not to say that there aren't nuances amongst different groups of employees, but those are what we are hearing consistently. And then in terms of biggest factors for people leaving organisations, what we're hearing and seeing in our data is that people want fulfilling work. That might be a bit challenging when some of our work is very response focused right now. But thinking about that purposeful nature of work, which also, Rachel, you spoke about in your introduction. The true self at work piece is interesting. People are looking to increasingly be who they are 24/7. I think we've all adopted a track pants mentality at home when we're working remotely, but there is a lot more of that, who we are and bringing that full self to work. Reward comes in there. Feeling cared about and listened to by managers is really important as well. So I guess the key takeaway from this insight into the gap is that it's more than a survey monkey. So, you know, checking in with your people about what matters most to them is really critical when it comes to retaining talent and building the right skills within the workplace and keeping them. So if you were to start somewhere, it would be having great conversations in the workplace, honest conversations. So leaders having korero and actively listening. So you'll see there number 5 on that on the Workforce Hopes and Fears survey, which looked at 52,000 people across the world, workers. They're saying they want to be listened to by their direct manager. So there's a genuine conversation. If you were to extend on this, there's something around employee experience hubs. So thinking about more immersive forms of engagement with your people so that you can identify not only what's top of mind for people, but the types of actions that the workforce might want to take to address those actions. Sorting out hygiene factors. So starting with pay, wellbeing, and flexible working. I touched on it briefly in my last slide, but pay and wellbeing. So feeling safe and healthy is a hygiene factor. It's the bare necessity for us to function as humans. Anything above that is a nice to have, but that's an essential. In a workplace setting, pay is also one of those hygiene factors that if you pay fairly and enough, that's typically sufficient, and the motivating factors longer term typically sit outside of pay. Interestingly though, flexible working, which used to be one of those draw cards where we would advertise as organisations to attract people, we would talk about flexibility. Now this is a hygiene factor. So we're increasingly seeing people say, actually, it's a not negotiable for me. You'll see that 73% of workers felt that wellbeing had improved as a result of hybrid working. So there are connective points between these hygiene factors. So it's worth understanding within your workplace what that connection is. Also interestingly, there on the bottom right-hand corner, New Zealand, a much higher proportion of New Zealanders expect flexible working compared to their international colleagues. Now, when I was doing a little bit of a snoop through the data in prep for the session, one of the things that I noted that seek.co.nz's recent figures showed that whilst numbers of job ads are continuing to increase and the number of applications are decreasing per job ad, one of the interesting insights though was that jobs are increasingly being advertised as permanent full-time jobs in New Zealand. So where we think about where we came from a couple of years ago where government was announcing it was going fully flexible, we're now in a situation where the pandemic has disrupted this progress, particularly in the flexibility and equity space. And there's a correction that's probably required around that. So we know that over 70% of the people who in New Zealand who lost their jobs at the start of the pandemic were women. So it's really important to think about these factors as we are considering these hygiene factors around pay, wellbeing, and flexibility. One of the other insights that I'd just like to leave in this space was that in our Hopes and Fears survey, we were looking at different segments of the workforce, and men are 9 percentage points more likely than women to ask for a pay rise. So it's worth keeping in mind what the implications are for parts of your workforce. So if you were to start somewhere around pay, wellbeing, and flexibility, pragmatically, it's about reframing that conversation around pay. It's messaging that conversation. So, paying more isn't going to keep people. What we are seeing is that regardless of pay, people will leave a great employer to do something different because they want something different. So it's having a more holistic conversation around why people are at your workplace and why they would choose to stay at that workplace. I think the extension option here is genuine flexibility. So we know that people really want flexible working. Saying that we offer flexible working, but in practice, not being able to offer genuine flexibility is a real tension point. So having a think through what parts of your operating model enable or hinder your flexible ways of working would be a good place to start. Focusing on attraction over retention. So this is a really interesting point, because retaining employees has often been the easier piece. But right now we are seeing, as I just mentioned, people leaving workplaces that they like for something different, because they either want flexibility, or they want time, they want to go see family overseas, whatever that might be. But people aren't just leaving because they want more money. They're leaving because they just want something different. So there is an element there of focusing on retaining your employees, but actually there's a bigger piece probably right now about how do you attract the type of person you want in your workplace. So we know that variety is the spice of life when it comes to an EVP, but there's a tension there between trying to do everything really well and just doing a couple of things really well. The important thing for employees right now is having some degree of flexibility within what that EVP means for them. So we know, for example, that from our What Workers Want survey in 2021, that a quarter of workers said that the reason that they join isn't always the reason they stay. So when you're thinking about your EVP, it's not going to stay static the whole time. So going back to my first slide, it is really about having an open conversation. Interestingly, nearly half of Australian employers recently said that they had no intention of updating their EVP despite what we're seeing in the market. So it's often seen as a nice to have, but right now it's pretty critical when you're thinking about retaining your talent. Skills are your business. So one of the biggest shifts that I'm seeing in the workplace and the system as a whole, when you think about government employers and workers, is where does that accountability sit for upskilling and reskilling the workforce? Typically people went away to institutions, educational institutions, they came back with a degree or a diploma, but that's irrelevant now. It's too slow. Relevant to a point, sorry. We've all got degrees, but there's an increasing need for employers to step into that gap and invest in that skills pipeline. So just as a synopsis from our recent workforce hopes and fears survey here, you can see globally that workers in New Zealand feel like we are more likely than other countries to have a lack of critical skills needed to perform the work. And less of our companies are investing in upskilling, and less of our organisations have a plan to create capacity through technology and to enable our workforce. So there's a real challenge in here around how do we create capacity through upskilling and reskilling. 1 in 5 New Zealanders do not have the digital capability to undertake basic day-to-day activities. So for example, we don't start using a smartphone. So when we're talking about digital upskilling, for example, it isn't actually necessarily becoming a developer or being able to really engage at a technical level in digital. It's the basic core skills. OECD has also talked about this. There are 2 core problems that New Zealand's facing, and one of those is the mismatch of skills. So people coming out with particular skill sets that aren't well matched to what the job market requires. So if you were to start somewhere, it would be about getting people up to speed really quickly. A really great place to invest is in your onboarding. It seems like a nice to, it's your bread and butter, but actually if you're bringing people into your workforce, the sooner you get them up to speed, the more impactful they will be in terms of alleviating some of that capacity pressure. If you were to extend this, the other end of the spectrum is getting really serious about a workforce plan and understanding those future capabilities that you require for your workforce and building for them today. Planning is not futile. So one of the things with the pandemic is we thought we might be prepared for something, and we probably found out we weren't as prepared as we thought we could be. And businesses have been so busy responding that doing long-term planning seems to be a bit of a futile exercise. But, you know, one of the things that we're seeing around skills is that planning is not futile. The market is not going to produce the types of skills on the scale at which we need them for when we need them, which is now. So organisations that are planning for those skills that they need and know what they need and when are better placed to be able to build that pipeline into their organisations. And it's not just about new skills either. So one of the big challenges is, as I mentioned earlier, is the content of jobs is changing. So the skills within existing positions and existing work. So the World Economic Forum has flagged that over the next 3 years from today, that about 40% of the core skills will change for workers who stay in their current roles. And there is something around a capacity issue there when we think about our leaders and burnout. So again, going back to wellbeing and thinking through how do you plan so that life feels a little less chaotic. So if you were to start somewhere, get access to the data and make sure it's accurate so that you can tell some of the workforce stories that are in your workplace. And then if you were to extend that to the other end of the spectrum, your opportunity is to really get into workforce strategy and planning, as I mentioned on the last slide, and thinking about some of those targeted interventions within your people strategies to support planning within the business. And that's a bit of a high-level overview from me. I shall hand back to you, Dave.
Great. Thank you so much, Danny. That was great information. Did have one question maybe you could address. So talking about COVID and well-being and mental health, and I know it's such a challenge in New Zealand for people to get mental health access. So a lot of times they're looking at the organizations and the companies to provide that. In your experience, how have companies been doing with that? And have you had any examples of companies that have done better than others? And any?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting shift. One of the things that was coming through quite overwhelmingly during the initial COVID pandemic was that people were looking increasingly to their managers and their organizations for a number of things, not just wellbeing, right? So managers were having to really step up and step into that wellbeing space, but we also saw them stepping up and into comms. So people were looking to their organization rather than, say, government or the 1 PM updates because they were triggery for some people. So you can already see how that leadership role was expanding, right? Like there's so many extra things that you need to do more of to help your workforce. But I think in terms of the wellbeing space, it's probably more holistic. That again, a lot of organizations have EAP, but we've seen the extension of these services. So EAP scratches the surface, but actually some people require more deeper support networks. Thinking about some of those ways of working so that people find solace in community when they are working remotely for whatever reason, and making sure that people are staying connected so that you find that balance between good remote working practices and not feeling isolated and alone. And one of the other things around EAP, actually, I've seen a few organisations starting to offer it to families. So not just the person who works for the organisation, but their extended immediate family. So thinking about that holistic, what's important for people at work.
Right. Great. Thanks so much. Okay. Well, thank you. And we'll come back to you for the panel. Thank you, Danny. And now let's go over to Susan, who will give us a perspective from her work with Fuel 50 and from the recruiting side, which should be really experiencing, and the organizations that she's been working with and the trends that she's seeing. Thanks, Susan.
Thanks, Dave. Kia ora koutou katoa. Thank you for having me today. As Dave briefly introduced, I lead people and culture for a global organisation, and he's asked me today to touch on kind of what I'm seeing in the recruitment space with regards to skills shortage. And I think there's been some key things that Danny's covered off in the research, and I want to start by saying, you know, the reason we're here and the reason we're in this skills skills crisis is a number of reasons, which Danny started by talking to. So we've got people in the workplace reassessing what they want and need from their employer. We've got low levels of unemployment in New Zealand, record levels of low unemployment, and we've got growth and expansion and high numbers of job applications happening. And so we've got to ask ourselves, just as I'm sure Barbara's going to touch on when she talks about kind of focus on retention, actually, how do we attract talent? So for different sectors and different industries, things look different. And for those of you joining today that look after more than just New Zealand in your capacity as a people leader or people and culture, you'll know that we're not alone in this skill shortage, that globally across a number of geographies around the world, this is replicated. And we're seeing the similar types of trends and statistics in terms of job numbers outweighing by far applications. And as an example, the majority of our sales team globally are based in the US. And I know when I looked into it a couple of months ago, there was over 800,000 sales jobs advertised in the US. It's no wonder we need to focus on how we attract talent. So first and foremost, my key tip would be understand the key drivers of talent joining your organization, and think about your overall business strategy. So what skills do you have today? What skills do you need for tomorrow? And is your people strategy aligned to build or buy? Because that's going to help direct your energy and your attention into the areas that are going to make the most difference. I think, as Danny mentioned, you can't do it all, and you know, being a centimetre deep and a mile wide is not going to work in this case. It's really identifying those big bang for buck areas that are really going to enable you to win this war from a talent perspective. You know, pay is a hygiene factor that's been mentioned already. You've got to make business sense when you're thinking about the areas of focus as well. So competing for dollars, if you've been close to what your business is doing from a recruitment perspective, particularly in probably the last 3 to 6 months, focusing on pay and trying to outwin your competition, particularly if they've got deep pockets, is probably going to drive you bankrupt from a business perspective. So think about the other things that can make you more competitive, whether that's, you know, or a myriad of things from a flexible working perspective. You know, are you wedded to the locations you've previously recruited in, or could you be looking at a wider, you know, variety of locations, whether that be in New Zealand or even offshore, that might give you access to the talent that you're looking for? Think about your employment brand. So not just those benefits, but as Danny's mentioned, your value proposition, which includes your vision and your values and your purpose, so that they're resonating for your people. Are they part of your employee value proposition? And then how do you take that and build your employment brand? How do you market what it means to work for you as an organization? And where do you do that? So how can you start to build your brand? Is that on your career site, or are there other places or other ways that you can build that brand and what you're known for? As we all probably know, and Danny mentioned there, the Seek statistics, job boards are not going to do it for you. Long gone are the days when you could post a job advert on a job board like Seek and actually be inundated with applications. We're now having to think much broader. Networks, if you're not tapped into your network, such as your alumni or external events, if you're focused on recruiting talent from universities as an example, how are you connected to the universities? How are you using graduate forums? How are you using industry sectors? I was at an event last week actually with Amazon Web Services as a key supplier to us, but they invest in building and developing female talent into the tech space. A great opportunity for us to promote our employment brand and hopefully hire female tech talent into our organization. And then when you're thinking about the areas to focus, purpose-driven. People are looking to move to an organization where they can have purpose and they can connect to the purpose of the organization. So how do you represent that in your employment brand? Well-being. People are expecting much broader than just the basics of well-being from a strategy perspective. Some of you might have seen a post I did on this a while ago on LinkedIn. Those things don't have to cost you money. They just have to be something you're focused on investing in. So well-being absolutely at the fore. Corporate social responsibility and sustainability is growing as an area that will attract people to an organization. And then, of course, as always, career and development. People want to be invested in. They want to grow their skills. And I'm sure that that will be a nice segue into what Barbara's going to talk about from a retention perspective. So back to you, Dave, or over to Barbara.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan. Yeah, so why don't we go? You gave me the segue there. So why don't we go, Barbara, we'll go right to you. As a person who's lots of people, and as we talked about, you have you don't have a lot of you're not a lot of direct reporting lines, but a lot of people under you, and you're managing a lot of people and trying to retain a lot of people.
Yeah, that's right, Dave. Yeah, no, fabulous segue. And I just want to pick up on the point that both Danny and Susan made around the importance of having a plan. I think it's so vital. And, you know, Susan said the build versus buy words. I think you've got to understand what it is that you are trying to do or achieve in the environment that we're in, or you risk spreading yourself far too thinly in terms of your efforts. But yeah, let me talk for a moment about what it is, I guess, that we're focusing on, and some of the things that I've been thinking about in terms of how it is that you retain the talent once you manage to actually recruit and get the talent in the door. And the first reflection, I guess, I would offer is that a few years ago, if you'd come to one of these webinars, we would have been talking fairly consistently about AI and about future of work in terms of a technology context. And it's really interesting that today, excuse me, I'm getting over the dreaded COVID, so I'm a little snuffly still, but today the conversation has been almost all about a human-centered approach, thinking about people, what people need, people want, the experience that people have had as they've gone through the last couple of years of COVID, the realizations that they've had as a consequence, and I guess the meaning that they're trying to bring to their life. I think this is a wonderful time for us as leaders of businesses and as people and cultural practitioners, for those on the call who fit that bill, to really lean into the human-centered element of what it is that we're talking about today. And that is truly to put people at the heart of your organizations and to think about holistically how you create an environment that people want to be a part of, that they want to stay, and that they feel connection and a sense of achievement and purpose. And so a lot of the things that we've been focusing on at GUD in the last couple of years have been focused around putting people at that centre and thinking about what is that we need to do in order to truly live that aspiration. Hand in hand with that goes the need for people to ask for what they need. And just think about that for a moment. If you've got a workforce that is able to ask for what they need, and you are human-centered and responding to that, then you've got a pretty good chance that you're creating a culture and an environment where people actually can have their needs met and therefore don't necessarily need to look outside the current workplace. So that's, you know, those are a couple of things I guess I would encourage you to think about. How is it that you put people at the centre, and how is it that you create an environment where they can ask for what they need? Susan talked about job boards and about the fact that, you know, they've lost some of the effectiveness. One of the things we've done recently, ironically, internally, is implement a job board. And the reason we did that was because our people told us that they wanted greater growth and development opportunities across the GUD businesses. So without going into a great deal of depth, we've got quite a number of different businesses as a holding company. And previously, each business was fairly much looking after their own environment, their own culture, and creating opportunities for people within that. But one of the things our people have increasingly said to us is, I don't actually want to leave the group. I want to stay within the group, but I'd love to have greater opportunity to move across the group. And so that's one of the ways in which we're responding to something that our people have asked us for, and that encourages retention, obviously, within the GED group. The last point I guess I would make is I think it's really important to think about your overall ecosystem. Think about the ecosystem that supports your people staying with you. Think about the ecosystem that supports them feeling a sense of purpose, a sense of connection, and a sense of mastery and skill within your workplace. And consider whether or not the frameworks which support that ecosystem, including frameworks which provide flexibility or allow you to respond to what it is that people need in terms of their work patterns, are in place. Think about whether or not you're able to respond. Think about whether or not you're developing your people. We've put a lot of focus over the last couple of years into developing our established leaders, our emerging leaders, and our future leaders to make sure that we've got that pipeline of talent coming through, but that people feel connected to you through the engagement in programs like that. We had someone recently who did leave the organisation, but as a part of making that decision, they shared with me that the fact that they're a participant in the program and getting so much from it was a very real factor for them in determining whether they were going to leave and take up the other opportunity or not. And that's what I want. I want to cause that decision drag when someone's faced with a decision around whether to stay or whether to go. Obviously, we've talked about remuneration a little today, but think about your incentives and think about whether your incentives are sticky enough and whether or not you're making it easy for people to stay or whether you're making it easy for them to leave. So there's a range of different things that you can do to support that. Very, very last thing that I wanted to touch on, I guess, and coming back to the question that was asked around mental health and managers and the environment, which actually supports much of what I've spoken about today and Susan and Danny have spoken about. We put a lot of emphasis not only into EAP, extension of EAP to family, as Danny touched on, but to implementing a peer support program as well. And that peer support program is about creating the environment, the ecosystem within each of our businesses that supports people being able to come forward with what it is that they need. If they've got a problem, if they're thinking about something they want to ask for at work, a way of making it safe and enabling them to talk about those things and just to have that be commonplace. So I would really encourage every workplace to think about how it is that you can use the layers within an organisation to support yourselves, as well as the external experts such as EAP and other organisations that are able to help you. I'm mindful of time, so Dave, I'm going to stop there because I could probably talk a day on this, but I won't.
Great, thank you so much. Well, great, really great presentation. So I guess I'll ask Susan and Danny to join the panel. Come back, and for people in the people in the audience, please submit your questions now through the Q&A function, and we have some good questions, but we will get to them at this time. Just one thing that I was thinking about, Barbara, as you were going through your presentation. So for people in your organization and the others as well, that cannot necessarily, they have hands-on work, or it's more difficult for them to work from home for different reasons, and want flexibility. They might even leave the organization to take a job where they have that flexibility. But how do you kind of address that? Are other things, other benefits you can provide to people to give them that?
So it can be tricky. I mean, if you've got a production line, as some of our businesses do, and you need somebody there from 7 in the morning until 4 at night or whatever it is, then you've got to work to that. What I would say is many of our businesses run split shifts, and so people have a preference for mornings, afternoons. You can accommodate that. People might have a preference for job sharing. It's the tried and true that actually allows you to create those opportunities for people. But even more than that, one of the things that we learned is actually people didn't necessarily, in a manufacturing context, didn't necessarily want flexibility as I might want flexibility, but what they wanted was to know that we had their back. What they wanted was to know that if they needed leave as a consequence of needing to care for someone who was dependent on them, that was not going to be a hassle, that if they needed to temporarily alter their hours for a period of time for whatever reason, that was going to be okay. We can do all of that in blue collar roles. There's nothing stopping us. Again, it's about managing to highest common, not lowest common denominator, and not being fearful of, oh, well, what if everybody wants this? We've just come out and said to everybody in all of our jurisdictions across the world, 10 days paid family violence and domestic violence leave as of right, retrospectively, or looking to the future. It doesn't matter, that's there for you. That's flexibility, because it gives people the tools when they need a need to be met to be able to access that. So don't think narrowly, think as broadly as you possibly can, and go and ask what it is that they actually need.
Right.
And I think just to build on that, Barbara, I think that goes to your point before about human-centered design, and listening to your people first and foremost about what's important to them. Because I think often we default flexibility to it being work from home, but actually flexibility can be so much more than that. And during my time at Coca-Cola Amatil, when we introduced the flexible policy, it was that co-design, co-creation. And actually, surprisingly, those in our manufacturing environment felt that they already had far more flexibility than those in our office-based roles. And so it's about exactly to what Barbara said, something for everyone. And if you can achieve that, it doesn't matter that some elements of your flexible offerings will only apply to some of your workforce, as long as you have listened to what your people need and want, and have kind of come from a people first angle.
And I think just to add on there as well, because you're so right, I think it's really important that you know the things that might inhibit your flexibility. So having a policy or having a statement, and you know that inherently people will see what somebody else is having and saying, oh, I want that too. So, but flexibility is different for different people. So it's about being able to tell a story about how you do flexibility in your workplace. And that it could look different or it could look the same, but it's about what people need, and just knowing some of those business processes or systems or practices that might get in the way of flexibility happening in a consistent yet varied way across your business.
Great. What about something that I like, Rachel, if you're listening, my boss, is the 4-day work week. So where is that? Is that moving along, do you think? Is that, I know in different countries that's starting to happen. Do you see that people are asking for that, or companies starting to move that way, or what do you guys think?
Well, I'd hate to anticipate what the government's going to do around that, Dave, but I think we'd all love a 4-day working week quietly, but I think it feels as though we're on the edge of a paradigm shift. It feels as though there's a real capacity issue, and I touched on it, and in fact, all of us have touched on it to some way, shape or form, where it's a perfect storm, where we need to create capacity in the workforce. And dangling a 1 less day a week seems like it's a bad thing to do at the moment. However, it's been proven to be more productive. So, it's how do you create that capacity? And I wonder what sort of things might need to be in place for us to entertain the concept of really flexible work practices across our whole workforces. And I think technology would be a big part of enabling some of that capacity, because it's not just a case of throwing more people at the work or more time. But I'm interested in what Barbara and Susan say.
Yeah, look, I think we're at the very beginning of contemplating how to make the 4-day work week work. Obviously there's been a fairly small number of high-profile organisations that have given it a go, but I wouldn't say by any means we've actually figured out how to to embody that and how to make it equitous for people within the workplaces. So it's something that I'm thinking about quite a lot, and periodically when I'm thinking about random, off the wall ideas, thinking about, how might we do this, or how might that work, or, do our people even want that? But I can't help but wonder if it comes back to, again, trying to encourage people to ask for what it is that they look for, or what they need, rather than trying to impose our framework or our way over the top of it. Because, I think Danny's right. We all might like a 4-day week, but really, do we?
Right.
And for how long?
Well, I do, really.
Yeah.
No, it's true, because you end up working. No, it's some people, and on our team we have people that are working. They were working a 4-day week, and one of our staff, and now she's gone to a 5-day week, but half time. On those days, or 2/3 time. So yeah, people want different things. Here's a very good question. You've all referred to this from Helen. So what are 6? You've all referred to the fact that you want people to ask for what they need, but how do you encourage them to do that? Do you have things in place that do that?
Yeah, good relationships between managers and employees.
Yeah.
So, that's where it starts. So, if you don't have the sort of relationship with your leader where you're actually able to say, this is how I am, this is what's on my mind, this is, what I'm preoccupied with, this is what I'm worried about, this is what I'm looking for, are you able to help me, or this is what I'm proposing to do to help myself, then I would say start there, because you need to do some work around improving that relationship. This may be inappropriate, but in many respects, the relationship that you have with your manager is like your partner relationship. You have to be able to talk at that sort of level, in bringing all of you to the relationship and the conversation. And if you can do that, then you can find a way to have those conversations. If it's not safe for you to do that, or you don't feel like you're able to do that, or you don't have the skills to do that, then you need to start with, how do I fix whichever of those things isn't present. But yeah, I think that's where you start.
Yeah.
And that was on one of my first slides, right? The research shows that people in the top 5, people wanted to bring their whole selves to work. They wanted to feel cared for by their manager, and they wanted to feel listened to. So people want it. It's just creating a genuine space for that conversation to happen. And I think there's something about role modeling and follow through. So, after the pandemic, a lot of organizations sent out a survey monkey. What do you want? And then what, like some generic principles or some sweeping interventions. That's not the same as genuinely hearing from people what they want, doing something with it, or explaining why you might not be able to. And yeah, role modeling from leaders is massive, right? If you are going to be working from home, or you're going to be doing something flexibly, talk about it so that it's normalized.
Yeah. And I think, I remember that the research has always shown that when people change jobs, the thing they look at is really the relationship with your direct manager, right? More than the company, more than pay, it's your relationship with your direct manager and the leadership that they're showing. And just to give, of course, a plug for our capability development programs, that's sending people to programs, ours or others, to be trained in leadership and emotional intelligence and all these things for leading people, because that really is so important. And a lot of people that rise up through the ranks with technical skills have not gained the people leadership skills, which are going to be critical. So that money that you're investing in people is really going to, I imagine, you guys are the experts, but I imagine really is going to show up in the retention of your employees, which is really a big cost savings for companies if they don't have high levels of turnover.
And I think Dave goes to the point about all of those are skills. So, do you understand fundamentally as a business, do you understand what skills you've got in your business? Do you understand what skills you need to build in your business where you're lacking capability and you need to invest, whether that be leadership skills or otherwise? Because the skills you invest in today and the skills that you develop within your organization will be the skills that you have tomorrow to play with, that will fuel your organization into the future. So, and that links all the way back to your business strategy. What are you going to do today to support the business of tomorrow?
And I think it was really interesting. You're right, because the skills in leadership is one that's often just seen as just added to the job of the leader, right? And in the research, I think it was Auckland University's research around burnout, Dave, possibly, AUT, sorry. So their research showed that 219% managers were feeling increasing levels of burnout. So they were 219% more likely to burn out than the rest of the workforce, or experience it. And so when you think about these additional skills that they are needing to absorb and do, and when we think about change and response, right, it's a suck on time and capacity. And when people are at full capacity, there isn't often a lot of space to think, reflect, do something different, practice something different. So there's a big ask. There's a lot in there about if you're asking leaders to do something different, how do you encourage them to practice it in a safe way and to create some capacity for that change in behavior or change in ways of working and skill set?
Great, thanks. So as we come to the end, I thought this is an interesting one, maybe to give some people listening some key takeaways. So what do you think, and Barbara used the term sticky incentives. So what are some of those incentives that people, help them to stick with the organization? What are those things that are harder to find or harder to change?
Yeah, sure. So development is one of them, and so it's not in the traditional remuneration sense, but how is it that you are creating opportunities for people to go and do things that they might not otherwise have been able to access or be able to do in the past. So in our case, that includes sending some people off to some international business schools for extended periods of time and giving them some growth opportunities. It also includes thinking about your long-term incentives in terms of are they truly encouraging people to stick around? Are they competitive? And are they long enough in their long-term nature? We've introduced in the last year some changes to both our long-term and short-term incentives, and the short-term incentive actually has a sort of a mid-term element to it now as well, which is directly in response to the environment that we're in.
Great. Here's one for Danny. How do you, somebody, RC asked, so how do you view a pay transparency influencing remuneration conversations with employees? So is this something you're seeing having an impact as you're doing your consulting? How does that, and in terms
There's
of
a lot
also
in that question, right,
pay?
Dave?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Look, I think, and there's lots of takes on this, right? Because we're also in a world right now where fair pay agreements are honing their way through government. I think there's a combination of performance-based pay and different types of pay going on at the moment in the sector. But I think the most important thing around transparency of pay is the equity piece. And I touched on it a moment ago in my presentation. We know that when it comes to equity, COVID hasn't been great for it. It's been the overall statistics of the workforce look great, but when you dig in there, they're not great for a lot of areas of our workforce. I haven't checked the most recent stats, but I know in 2020 and 2021, increasing unemployment for those people with disability. So there's lots of pieces in there that just get covered up by the sweeping statistics. So I think from a pay perspective, the same thing. I touched on the fact that men are more likely than women to ask for that pay rise. So I think transparency around pay is important from an equity perspective. But again, every organisation has its nuances. But I think from an ESG lens as well, it's probably likely to become a bigger part of an organisation's governance.
Right. Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think we've come to the end of our time. First, I'd like to thank our panel. Really true. I'm so pleased that you're taking the time to support our programs, and Barbara and Susan and Danny. We've been doing a series with PwC on the future of work. So we'll have another webinar coming up. But thank you so much for taking the time. I know you've all been very busy. I said to them, it's been very difficult to set up meetings, all traveling and going around. So that's great. And thank you to all the participants that have joined us today. Looked like we had about 150. We had another 100 or so that had signed up. We will send you a replay of this webinar following, and as well to the people that had drop off early or came in late. I'll also send you an email follow-up with some information on our programs and our information session coming up on July 26th. Another webinar if you'd like to join that. And as the panel mentioned, thinking about developing your people certainly there's lots of places. We have some great programs that you can look into for moving in that direction. So I think with that, that's it. Any final words from the panel? Thank you very much. Travel safe, stay safe, and we will see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.